Today is the 9th class, right? 第9周, so it's right in the middle of the semester. And please work on your midterm project, okay? The review, a paper review is due at the end of this month, okay? End of November. Okay, today we are going to talk about emergent grammar. Emergent grammar, 有没有人第一次听到？研一的同学有没有听过这个 emergent grammar？ No, 没听过。什么叫 emergent? What does it mean, emergent? 浮现出来的，对不对？成型中的。Yeah, exactly 就是这个意思。那 grammar 怎么会跟成型、浮现这种流动的概念放在一起？ Grammar 不是死的吗？ So that we can memorize grammatical rules, right? How come it is emergent? 想想我们上个礼拜讲的，我们上个礼拜在讲什么？要回去上个礼拜看那个结论吗？上个礼拜的讲义 ，emergent grammar 之所以会 emergent， 跟什么有关？跟时间有关呀。但是时间本身不会就是突然改变嘛，对不对？在时间当中，什么东西造成 grammar 的改变？我们一直在讲 discourse and grammar， 还记不记得上个礼拜讲的？所以不要忘记这个 discourse level 的东西。那我们上个礼拜看到就之所以会改变，它有一个 discourse pattern， 记不记得？记不记得？什么 pattern？ 就在一个 narrative type of discourse 当中，它的位置，它前后的东西有没有？这个我们就叫做 discourse pattern。其实你们已经有这个概念，我们以前用的可能是 context， 有没有？我们会用 context 这个概念。那 context 呢，比较是指文本上的 discourse 又更大，它也包含人与人之间的互动。所以如果你还记得 Tommy 说 grammaticalization 其中的一个原因，除了 metaphorical extension 之外，就是什么 context-induced changes。context-induced changes 这里就是一个例子，上个礼拜我们看的就是一个例子。The recurrent discourse patterning of narrative sequencing with the serial verb use of 就 right? 就是你们刚刚讲的就通常放在一个动词一个 serial verb 当中的第一个动词，那在 narrative 的这种 sequencing 当中，它又刚好在一个 cross boundary， 同时整个 narrative 呈现出来的一定是前因后果的这种 sequential event， 是这样子的一个 discourse patterning motivates the reinterpretation of 就，所以你有一个 clear case here， 不只是理论。Okay, here you have a case which illustrates the so-called context-induced reinterpretation. Okay? From a verb signaling a consequent event, 它本来只是一个动作 right? Motion as a consequent to the grammatical marker of the consequent itself. 所以就现在变成一个 marker, marking 什么？ A consequent event, 而不是 part of the consequent 作为它的 propositional content 的一部分。所以你会看到为什么我们说语义是从 propositional 到什么 textual， 这又是一个例子。在我的论文里面，其实我有提到 this is a good illustration of a semantic change from propositional content， 记不记得？它本来是属于 proposition 的一部分嘛 right？ 它是那个 serial 的 verb 动作中的一部分，可是现在它变成一个 linking element， 那 linking element 是不是在 textual 的 level？ 听懂了没 ？OK， 所以这样子一个 case study illustrate 一个很重要的理论上面的 premise。Discourse reveals a kind of fluid patterning。那这个 fluid patterning 就是我们在讲 emergent 的这个概念。什么叫 emergent？ 它是一个 fluid patterning。 which apparently can effectively shape the relatively rigidified patterns of grammar. 没有错，相对而言，语法是比较固定的，比较严谨的，但是它仍然有变动的可能。而这个变动呢，跟这个 fluid patterning of discourse 有关。所以 emergent grammar 是 due to 什么？ Due to use, right? Due to discourse patterning, due to frequency, due to a lot of interactional factors. 好，下面。那我们今天要看一个，上个礼拜我们看的是就、才这两个连接词，今天我们要特别看一个中文系统、中文语法中的东西 ，the article system, the emergence of the article system in Chinese spoken discourse. 中文有没有 articles？ 中文有没有 articles？ 啊？这要看你从什么时候看嘛，对不对？10年前、20年前，如果你看 Thompson 的那本经典的著作《Chinese a Reference Grammar》，它里面说得很清楚，他说 Chinese is a language without articles， 他直接就这么讲。OK？ 可是今天却有一些研究，从1990年代黄宣范老师第一篇 paper， 他开始发现，在 discourse 的 level。所谓 discourse， 通常我们是在讲 spoken data，OK，spoken discourse。他慢慢发现，中文好像也有 definite article。那问题来了 ，definite article 跟中文原先有的 classifier system 有什么不一样？所以我们先回来想一想中文本来的面貌 ，OK， 它的 original fact 是什么？如果学者说 Chinese is a language without articles， 原因在于哪里？在书店你看到同学 ，right？ 你问他，你在这干嘛？你在书店干嘛？啊？你在书店干嘛？闲晃，你还不如去醉月湖还是竹湖看闲逛 ，OK？ 醉月湖是台大的。你在书店干嘛？你说我来买书，有没有看到？为什么他们说 Chinese is a language without articles？ 我来买书，书，一个 bare noun without any marking， 了解吗？换成英文呢 ？I'm here to buy a book， 单数的 a 有没有 article？Or you have to say, I'm here to buy books. 复数还是要有标记。如果你确定对方知道是哪一本，老师昨天 assigned 的那本 textbook, I'm here to buy the book. The teacher assigned. 这样懂了吗？所以中文没有。那凭什么我们说它在改变？所以今天我们希望报告的时候，特别要强调的是，基于什么样的原因、证据，我们可以说中文慢慢出现了 article system。OK， 下面黄老师1998年的 paper， 他说 the distal demonstrative 就是那 ，OK， 这是 proximal 的，近的、远的。那或那个 is becoming a definite article， 干什么？To mark a familiar and identifiable referent。 记得 definite 的意思，我们在 functional syntax 那堂课一直在强调 OK， 什么叫 definite article？ 记不记得？什么时候你要用 definite article？ definite article 的功能是在 mark 一个什么？一个什么？ identifiable 的 referent， a familiar and identifiable to the hearer。这个观念一定要清清楚楚啊！所以如果我问说，remember Professor Sun, the speaker in our conference? You see， 我为什么直接用 the speaker？ Remember the speaker of our conference？ 了解吗 ？I assume it's familiar to you. I assume it's identifiable to you. 所以其实从某个意义来讲 ，the 标记之后， 它跟专有名词有异曲同工之妙。你懂我在讲什么？它在 referential intent 上面类似于专有名词，就是那个你清楚的。专有的意思是说，它因为 referent 很 unique， 以至于你知道是谁，我就不需要再有额外的提示。这样了解吗？那 the 就是一个提示，这样了解哈。Oh yes, he's from Stanford， 你知道是哪一位。那今天我们要报告的重点就是 What is the discourse evidence for the claim? Right? 可以吗？谁报告第一篇 ？OK， 好，下面。那我读了他的 paper 之后，我就一直有一个疑问。那有了 definite article， 为什么没有 indefinite article？ 那很有意思的是，黄老师自己在他的 paper 最后他有说，他说，照理说应该也有对称嘛，也有 indefinite article 的出现，可是他说一个似乎是一个 candidate，OK， 似乎是一个 indefinite 的 article 的 candidate， 可是它的出现频率很低 ，OK， 这是他的结论。但是当我在看我收集的 discourse data， 其中有广播的那个录音，还有一些口语的对话，对，我发现一个的出现率很高哎，我统计了一下，平均1分钟就出现1点多次，就1分钟就有一个，至少有一个，在我的 data 当中。所以接下去我就问一个问题 ，OK？ 那 if 那 or 那个 is emergent as a definite article， 那边写错了 ，as a definite article in Mandarin。What about the indefinite article？ 这是一个很自然的问题。那我发现 the numeral classifier 一个 is becoming an indefinite article, marking a newly introduced。不一样哦，是 newly introduced， 就是 discourse 当中第一次出现的，我们叫 first mention， 或是 newly introduced。unfamiliar, non-identifiable referent。Where did you see her？ 你在哪里看见她 ？Where did you see her？ 你说哦。In a coffee shop， 这是标准的 indefinite 用法。为什么？这个 coffee shop 是一个个体，可是你不知道哪一个。OK？ 如果你知道，我就会说哦 ，in the coffee shop that we usually go to， 有没有？这样知道了吗？所以，那中文也有这样子的用法吗？我怎么证明 ？What is the discourse evidence for this claim? Again, same thing。谁报告这篇 ？OK， 好。拉拉，你们2位昨天都没有来找我，表示都没有问题，一切都很清楚，很好。下面，那接下来呢，还有一些好玩的问题，我们可以继续去探讨。当我说 Chinese has an indefinite article 的时候，我不敢讲它已经在 grammar 当中，我只能说 emergent， 就是开始出现 ，right？ 为什么？因为如果是一个像英文一样的 article system， 它一定是怎样的？英文你一定要怎么样 ？obligatorily 的去加这个 marker， 所以不是 a book 就是 the book， 你没有选择的，懂吗？它必须是 obligatory。懂我在讲什么哈？所以 What are you doing here? I'm here to buy a book, or I'm here to buy the book. 每一次的单数名词出现的时候，你都一定要加，这样了解吗？可是中文呢？好，我会尽快做联络。好，我会尽快做一个联络。在中文里面没有 obligatory 啊，它还是 optional。OK？所以 the function of 一个到底是 article 还是 classifier， 你会发现它仍然在一个 competition 的阶段。这个我们在 discourse 的研究里面叫 competing motivations。那这个 competing motivations 的概念，你们应该也不会很陌生。还记得我们在讲 Dubois 的那篇文章，他说 ergative 的 marking system 是因为什么？New information 跟 old information 之间的一种 information patterning， 还记不记得？有没有回想出一些东西来 ？The discourse basis for ergativity 还记不记得？什么叫 ergative marking？ 谁回答加3分。什么叫 ergative marking？ 我们读过这篇文章，而且我讲了，我好几次在前面画图，你们都忘了吗 ？A S O 还记不记得？读过的东西不能忘啊。什么叫 ergative marking？ 还记不记得？想想看嘛，跟英文不一样嘛，英文是 nominative marking system 嘛 ，right？ 所以先想英文嘛，英文是什么 ？A 及物动词的主词 ，S 不及物动词的主词，它们的形式是怎么样？一样的。那什么叫 ergative？ 那什么跟什么一样？先讲一样的嘛。是 S 跟 O 是一样的。记不记得 A 是特别的，所以 叫什么 A 叫什么 A 叫 ergative 嘛 A 的 marking 就是 ergative， 其他这两个是 absolutive。 名称本身不重要，概念更重要，这样了解吗？ A 所以叫做 given A constraint， 记不记得为什么 A 会有 ergative marking？ 为什么 S 跟 O 不一样？Dubois 把它解释成是 information patterning， 记不记得？是 information status 的问题，因为 A 的位置通常放 given information， 所以在这个语言当中 A 的 case marking 跟其他两者不一样，记得了吗？好，那你记不记得那时候我就讲到，那为什么不是所有语言都是 ergative？ OK， 为什么不是所有语言都是 ergative？ 为什么还有英文是 nominative 的？有没有印象？我那时候就提到 because there's a competing motivation， 就是 competing 的 discourse force。 如果 ergative marking 是考量到 information status， 那 nominative marking 就像英文的 A 跟 S 是一样的形式，都是主格的形式，对不对 ？OK， he ran 跟 he hit Mary 这两个 he 主格，这样了解了吗？那为什么英文是一个 nominative case marking？ 是什么样的 discourse force？ 记不记得？是 subject predicate 没错啊，可是 subject predicate 是不是 discourse level 的东西嘛？对不对 ？discourse level 你的考量是什么？这两个东西所共通的特性是什么？主事者只是 A 啊，对，他是一个 actor 没有错，这是语义上嘛，对不对？可是我们说在 discourse level 这两个东西共同的是什么？所以如果 ergative 是考量到所谓的 information status， right？ 那 A 跟 S 的这种 nominative case marking 是考量到什么？都还我了 topicality 嘛 topical 嘛 A 跟 S 都比较 topical， 记不记得？记不记得？不记得 apparently OK， 这两个都比较 topical 嘛，都是 topic 嘛 OK， topical 的意思知道吗？ thematically important 嘛，是 discourse level 的 topic OK。那我为什么讲这么多是要解释什么叫 competing motivation。 在 discourse level 你有 topicality 的考量，这两个东西都是 topical， 你也有什么 information status， 它们都是 given 或是 new。 同样的在中文目前的情况之下，你会看到 article system 在慢慢的浮现中 OK。 那另外还有一些什么跟它 compete 的，就是这个原先有的 classifier system。那到底我们怎么来决定一个什么时候会出现？所以我写完了那篇文章之后，有一个我的学生，他其实之前是静宜的学生徐仲明，他就觉得说这个问题很好玩。如果 the use of 一个 is optional right， 那 what are the factors that correlate with the occurrence of 一个？什么时候一个比较会倾向于出现？懂吗？有没有哪些 discourse level 的 correlates 我们可以 predict 一个在这个情况之下比较可能出现，这样了解吗？那他就做了一个 variational 的 study。variational study 是利用统计的一个程式，你把一些 variable 输进去，然后看哪一个比较 significant。那后来他发现是在 modificational phrase 有 modificational phrase 的情况下，有这个贡献结构的时候比较容易出现，所以一个通常后面会有 modifier 或是前面有 modifier， 一个很动人的剧情，很动人的一个剧情。那这个其实也是很能理解的，很有道理的，因为当你想要用形容词去修饰一个东西，它的个体性，它的重要性就比较大，来，那你加上一个，又再一次强调它的个体化 individuate 的这个概念，还有它的 referential importance 就增加了 ，OK？ 所以这些东西你们要慢慢去熟悉，因为语言使用的时候牵涉到就是你要谈这个东西，这个东西重不重要？你要谈这个东西，你怎么样去提示我有关这个东西它的 referential content， OK？ 所以谈到名词 article system， 我们一定会一直在谈 referent 的概念。那这个 referent 的概念，因为中文没有 marking， 所以我们很模糊的，这也是为什么我们的逻辑思考需要加强的地方。当你说我去买书，其实这个书有好几种 reference 的可能，这样了解吗？那我们一再强调，其实在名词的学习上面，你看哈，我一直用一个很简单的例子，你只要想桌子，来，我昨天买了一张桌子，这是中文很 typical 的用法。当我说我昨天买了一张桌子，这个桌子本来是一个 common noun 嘛，这边有桌子，那边有桌子，所以世界上有什么几千几万数不清的桌子。那当我说我昨天买了一张桌子，人很自然的会想要知道 which one， 这样了解吗？所以语言有一个责任要去标记 which one。 那为什么专有名词跟普通名词不一样？这个是你们国中就应该要搞清楚的。你说我昨天看见老王，跟我昨天看见一个人有什么不一样？这样了解吗？我昨天买了一张桌子，跟我昨天买了一个，有没有桌子？有没有专有名词啊？电脑桌也不是专有名词。有一种桌子就是固定的物品，比较少专有名词。OK， 好，我昨天去了一家银行，跟我昨天去台新银行。OK， 这个例子也不太好，因为台新银行还有很多分店。我昨天去县政府，这样可以吧？竹北县政府 ，OK， 跟我昨天去了一个地方，不一样在哪里？这样懂吗？所谓专有的意义是什么？是它的 referent， 它所指涉的那个物件是固定独一的，是它专有的，了解吗？县政府的那个 building， 县政府专有，你们懂我在讲什么吗？可是你说我去了一家银行，我去了一个办公室，我去了一个学校，这些都是所谓的 common name。common name 就是什么？不属于任何人的。那当我要把它个体化的时候，我是不是要加上一些修饰？了解吗？你去哪一家银行？银行这么多，哪一家嘛？你要讲一讲。桌子这么多，哪一张桌子嘛？人那么多，哪一个人嘛？所以这就是在沟通上很自然的。我要讲清楚 which one， 这样了解吗？那 which one 就是整个 article system 要标记的。有没有问题？没有，那我们开始进入报告。
好，大家早。今天我们要看的是黄轩范老师的 The Emergence of a Grammatical Category, Definite Article in Spoken Chinese。那这边的话，我们看到这前面第一章就是回忆一下老师以前教过的 Emergent Grammar。It is a real-time temporal social phenomenon. Its regularities come out of discourse and are shaped by discourse. 所以我们待会这篇 paper 里面呢，它总共提了12个，它列举出来的有12个例子，然后都是实际对话的例子。
等一下哈，这边重点，像你们看到这样子的，你看到这样子的定义，你就要把它记住。之前讲过，语言学所有的概念，你都要有一个清楚的定义，就是它的意义何在，然后有一个很清楚的 example。所以当人家提到 emergent grammar， 你就要想到它的 premise 是什么，它后面的概念是什么，就是 grammar is 什么 ，it is 这个 it 是指什么 ？grammar 在哪讲？grammar is a 一起说 real-time temporal social phenomena。你这句话的意思是什么？就 grammar 跟 discourse 是怎么样息息相关的嘛？什么叫 real time？ 是在你实际讲话的这个过程中，你去怎么样定义它的 temporal 跟时间有关 ，social 跟我们两个人的关系，跟我谈话的目的有关，听懂吗？然后接着 its regularity 是什么的？就是 grammar 的 regularities。OK，come out of discourse 这句话背起来哈。Its regularities come out of discourse。我们以前常常讲主词从哪里来？主词是英文 grammar 里面的一个 regularity 嘛？为什么会有主词的概念？或者主词这个成分从哪里来？如果用这句话来解释 ，come out of discourse， 那 discourse 是什么东西？就是我们刚刚讲的 topicality。OK， 英文的主词就是那个句子里面最 topical 的东西 ，and are shaped by discourse， 同时又继续的被 discourse shape， 这样了解吗？那你把这句话背起来，以后我每次讲到 emergent grammar， 你就背出这句话来就好了，对不对 ？Grammar come out of discourse and are shaped by discourse。好。
好，第一部分的 introduction， 这篇 paper 里面，我们就是从那个 discourse pragmatic functions， 然后来探讨中文的 demonstrative 指示词。然后他再次强调说，我们是要看 naturally occurring data， 然后来看中文的词类里面，尤其是 definite article， 它是如何出现的。那这里呢，黄老师他提到说，一个广为人知的 conception， 或是他说迷思，因为在这之前，都是说中文是没有 determinant 的，例如说1988年的 Norman， 然后以及1981年 Lec09。
讲什么？讲清楚啊 ！Norman 讲什么
？Norman 讲说 Chinese Lec articles。Norman
是谁？你知道吗？他写了很多中文的教科书。我之前20年前我在美国教中文当助教的时候，我就是用 Norman 编的书 Chinese。OK， 所以他是一个非常受人敬仰的中国学者。
好，那 Lec09 这边，他虽然说 Chinese does not have words that correspond to the in English， 然后但是他提到说，那这个词它也渐渐的开始有像英文一样中那个定冠词的功能。如果它没有被强调的话，然后他也提到说一就是那个一个的一。如果它不是在被强调的地方的话，它也是像英文那样子的的功能。所以他是说渐渐的就在发展当中。那接着我们看到它的 database， 这里面呢有10个录音的面对面的对谈以及广播节目，总共是76分钟。那从它的 data 里面，它总共有729个指示词的 token， 那在这之中有 63.2% 是 distal， distal 就是远的，就是我们指那些有包含那的。那 36.85% 这边少 percent， 是 proximal 指的是近的。所以这边我们会看到它的比率有相差蛮大的啊，那的话会比较多。那接着它要说明一下，指示词的 token 包含了demonstrative pronouns、determinants、adverbs、connectives， 这些它都包含在内。接着呢，第3部分它就会开始提到它的语料。那这里第3部分的 use of Chinese demonstratives in conversation， 我先把它的结论先放出来，总共它整理出了8个 demonstratives， 有8个语用语法的功能所以这边我先念过去。第一个 situational use， 第二个 Endophoric， 第3 Unavailable use， 第4 Identifying， 第5 Referent-introducing， 第6 Discourse marking， 第7 Connective use， 第8 Post marking。 这个还分成2种，那待会我们就会一一看它的例子来说明。例如说例子1，这是中广流行网。待会我都用那个有颜色的字，红色或蓝色，把我们要看的字给标出来。那这就是 situational use， 我们最典型的那个，把它当成像 subject 一样，说这是什么什么东西，然后接着我们就开始说明它。第2个例子呢是，让我念一下。那所以我唱到中间是口哨的 solo， 对不对？然后我再离开，然后刘老师再吹口哨把那个唱完。这边的话呢 Endophoric 它指的是之前已经提到他们知道的东西，所以那个指的就是他们讨论要唱的那一首歌。那他在讨论，他跟另外一个人告诉另外一个人说他们要怎么安排那首歌如何呈现这样子。对，这是 Endophoric。第3个例子的话，这有点长，我们看到中间 B 他先说，那你的这个他的这个政治这个立场会不会影响你呢？好 A 他就说应该这样讲吧，他的立场不会影响我，但是因为好，所以他这边的这样讲吧，他的这样不是指前面 B 讲的那些话，而是他在表达他自己的立场。那他的立场就放在这样讲吧的后面，所以他这是 Connective， 就是他要表示的是在后面的，他要代替的 referent， 他要讨论的东西是在往后找。
这个研一的同学清楚吗？研一的同学清楚什么叫做 Endophoric， 什么叫 Cataphoric 吗？你报告的同学希望你们能够常常注意同学懂不懂。你自己有没有想过这几个词真正的意思是什么？来，我们回去看一下。其实简单的讲 Endophoric 就是前指，这样懂吗？什么叫前指？就是它指的是前面的东西，所以那个代替的是什么？它指前面的东西。我常常讲名词基本上就是在讲 referent 嘛，它的 referential content 其实是在指前面的东西，这就叫前指。所以为什么代名词都是我们叫 Endophoric pronoun， 这样懂吗？我前面讲小王昨天来看我，他这个他代替的就是前面的小王，所以我们说代名词有什么先行词，因为它是前指嘛，所以是先行啊。那反过来说呢，如果它是后指，这样了解？英文有这样的情况，中文比较没有。英文你可以说talking about his interest， John 怎么样怎么样，所以那个 his interest 的 he 其实是在指后面的 John， 这叫后指，这样懂吗？这个就叫 Cataphoric， 所以它有后行词而不是先行词。那每一次我们在讲这个 discourse function 的时候，请大家一定要理解它的那个 用法到底是什么？我们看一下刚刚你的第一个，为什么叫 situational 用法？什么叫 situation？situation 就是在指这个实体的环境，了解吗？那它其实在报告嘛，所以这就是在那个环境，在那个情境之中的。比方我现在讲，这个麦克风有没有？我为什么说这个麦克风？因为它事实上是跟我比较近的，所以在 speaker 所在的这个 situation 来定义的。如果我说内架录影机，有没有摄影师在用的内架录影机？我为什么用内架？了解吗？这叫 situational， 因为它跟 speaker 所在的 situation 有关，它是离 speaker 比较远的，懂了哈？
那我们看第4个例子，他说：“可是台语有时候那种很古早那种时代，那种声音很奇怪，有没有？好像捏着鼻子那种声音。到这边为止啊，它的那种这3个，它都是在这边是 unavailable use。unavailable 的意思指说，如果我只有那种的话。”那别人是不晓得他在讲什么，所以我后面必须要接，比如说像关系子句啊，或者是像名词的补语来补充说明，我还要用后面额外的东西来说明。例如说，他这边讨论的是台语的某种声音，所以那 B 前面讲了那么多之后呢 ，A 他就接着说留声机那种声音。所以 A 是表示说，他理解了，说我知道你想表达的哪一种，然后他又提出了一个说是类似这种吧，像留声机那种声音，所以 B 他就附和他说对，没错。
那请问为什么叫 unavailable？ 跟前面有什么不一样？刚刚 introduce 刚刚的没有 introduce 新的东西吗？刚刚前面的那个那种，它不是也 introduce 后面一个新的东西吗？那不要忘记哈，在这里的那种，它可能都是第一次出现，可是它的 referent 本身是对方比较知道的，是 familiar 跟 identifiable。这里为什么叫 unavailable？ 之前的前形或是后形，它都可以 pinpoint 一个名词，它是代替那个名词。可是在这里，它没有办法找到一种名词。所谓 unavailable， 就是它的 referent 是 unavailable， 这样懂了吗？这叫 unavailable use。OK， 为什么说 unavailable？ 我一直试着去 describe， 可是我好像并没有真正讲出来 exactly 是哪一个 reference。就像那种哪种？那种捏鼻子的声音，那种留声机那种声音，可它实际上不是在讲留声机的声音，是像留声机那种声音。所以意思就是说，它的那个 specific 的 reference 其实一直没有出现，这叫 unavailable， 知道哈？好。
谢谢老师。那第五个的话，他说，我有机会可以后来坚持了，也是因为自己不放弃，一直不想，就是有一点那种不放弃的那种脾气。好，这边的话呢，他讲的是就是，那他说明的是，这也是 unavailable， 因为我前面他讲了半天，然后他没有讲出来说为什么，然后一直到最后他就讲说就是那种不放弃的那种脾气，他才把它给提了出来。
修饰说。
OK。好，第六个它这比较特别，他说像讲到那个溪头那个经营好了，像溪头啊，建森林游乐区就是我们森林的一个项目，因为我们森林本来就讲到那种森林保育嘛。那这边的话，它的特别的是说，它会那个，它其实是要来讲一个主题，它的 topic 是 溪头森林游乐区，或是溪头，他就要讲那个 topic。然后通常我会搭配像这样的一个字把它讲出来，像那个什么，就是我把它提示出来 ，introduce a referent。
请问这里的用法是什么？你前面都有标示，这边没有标示了，所以这个还是 unavailable 吗？还是这是什么用法的例子？
这是那个
introducing a referent，introducing 的用法。
对。
所以这里它才是指出一个 topic，OK？先讲清楚这是什么用法。
好，这个是identify。这跟刚才那个一样啊，它也是 introduce a new topic。sorry。然后他说我今天就跟那个，这是李某某说那个小强的事情。好，这个那个都是在指小强，然后后面提到的是什么？他，通通都是讲那个小强的事，所以他也是介绍。刚才那个是介绍一个新的主题 topic， 像是新的地方这样。然后第7个这个是介绍一个新的人物。那最底下那个蓝色那边，上帝也疯狂，就是那部电影，那个丽书讲话。这边有一个比较特别的是。丽书啊，它是一个专有名词，就是一个人名。那为什么它那个要接人名呢？
前面的小强不是也一样？
对。那个小强跟那个丽书。
那个溪头，你当溪头也加那个。OK。
对，都是。好，那通常我们在用那个的时候啊，都是指涉说。因为是距离听话者比较近 ，hearer， 距离听话者比较近，所以我们假定说听话者对那个东西会比较熟悉，所以我们才会通常会用那个。然后，但是像这种情况，那个加上专有名词的话，是说说的人的 speaker， 他假设说听的人addressee， 他并不晓。他知道那个例书，但是他晓得的并没有说的人那么多，就他的理解并没有那么多，所以我才要特别讲，我不直接讲例书就好了，我就要讲说那个例书，就是我在跟你强调，然后他暗示的是说，我对例书的了解比你还多。
你们听懂了吗？那我可不可以问你，那个小强跟那个例书有什么不一样？回到前面一个例子，讲到那个溪头那个经营好了，这边又跟那个小强有什么不一样？
不是拿经理然后
这是人名吗？你在读的时候不会有这个问题吗？这才是整个重点嘛！我觉得你们有时候自己读啊，一定要一再的反复问自己，你读懂了没有？什么叫做为什么这地方溪头？请问溪头是不是专有名词？
是啊。
对嘛？那专有名词为什么前面还要加个哪个？重点就在这嘛。如果我说讲到溪头，你也知道啊，对不对？因为溪头本来就是大家都知道的一个专有名词嘛。所以重点就在于，在这个 discourse 的环境中，为什么我加上那个？我加了那个，我做了什么？
然后这个那个是指那个溪头吗？还是那个溪头经？
这个是指是不是这里的那个是指那个溪头的经，只是它有一个
对，只是
重复了一下，就是被确认那种概念。
它那个这边的那个不是在指溪头，而是指那个溪头经营。
那个你的意思说那个经营，可是重点他用溪头来修饰的时候，其实你也是知道的，对不对？那你可以回去看看那个。 前面那个小强的事情，所以你觉得我是在讲那个事情吗？
我觉得我在 emphasize 我感觉。
今天就跟那个李莎莎说那个小强的事情，那个。
我觉得你们讲的没有错，他的确不是在强调那个专有名词本身，可是专有名词已经作为一个 anchor 了。我换一种讲法好了，它也已经作为一个 anchor 了嘛。所以溪头的经营，来，我前面为什么加那个？
可以 double anchor。double
anchor 的目的是什么？讲到溪头的经营，我这样问你们。讲到溪头的经营，跟讲到那个溪头的经营，这就是整篇的文章重点啊！所以金央，你应该要回答我们的问题，因为 exactly 为什么它叫那个？它给一个功能嘛，它的功能是什么？你可以把那个念一下吗？他说在这样的用法中，他在做什么？
好，他说。Speaker B introduces a new protagonist using a proper name into the conversation, which hero A readily accepts, and B goes on to talk about him through line 53.
你在讲这个小强吗？所以我是在讲小强吗 ？OK， 我的确是在 introduce 一个 protagonist， 一个主角。那你的理解是什么呢？这就是我说你们报告同学自己真的一定要搞懂，否则你没有办法把这篇文章的精髓介绍给大家。这边之所以为什么他把它定义为它的 function 叫 introducing 一个什么？它叫 introducing， 对不对？它的 function 是 introducing， 意思是什么？
介绍。
这有点像那个 presentative， 就是有一个很重要的人物要出场了，来，所以它不是语义上的，语义上溪头、小强也许你都认识，可是在这个 discourse level， 我要预备一个 stage 给这个重要的人物，因为我后面全部都要讲这个人。那我加了那个以后，我把这个人物介绍出来的时候，我强调了他的什么？熟悉度嘛，我就是强调他对你的熟悉度。让你觉得这个人更容易什么？对，你更容易 identify， 这样了解吗？所以加那个的功用就在这里，不然他就不会把它叫做 introducing。你们懂我的意思了吗？他就是要 introduce 一个大人物出来，而这个大人物呢，也是你熟悉的，所以才会用那个。这样懂了哈？好，那为什么跟下面这个不一样？就是什么那个上帝也疯狂，那个丽叔讲话在那边咕咕咕咕。那你说这个那个跟那个那个有什么不一样？他难道不是 introducing 一个人物吗？不是，他就不是，了解吗？他在这里不是要介绍一个主角出场，因为主角出场是还有很多要跟他相关的谈论才对嘛。可是这里的丽叔其实只是出场一下下，串个场就要走了，这样了解吗？那他强调这里的那个是什么意思？就是那个上帝也疯狂，我 assume 上帝也疯狂对你来说是什么？是熟悉的。我也 assume 丽叔是什么？对你而言是熟悉的。不管你熟不熟悉，我强调的是什么？我借由我认为你应该熟悉，那他们的讲法是说，我借由我很熟悉，对 speaker 来说，这是一个熟悉的人物。来让你也觉得他是熟悉的，这样了解吗？因为我相信黄老师跟他的学生，并没有真的站在 identity 就是 definite 是 identifiable to the hero 的那个角度去谈，所以刚刚你解释的，他强调 speaker 强调这个东西是熟悉的，不管对谁来说，了解吗？那借由 marking 隶书 as a familiar referent。是不是让你更容易去 process？ 这样了解吗？这是在 discourse 里面的一个常用的 strategy。OK， 那个什么 ？OK， 你也许也不清楚，可是我用那个的时候 ，somehow 我就 mark 它 as a familiar referent。 样可以了吗？清楚了吗 ？OK。
好，我们看下一个例子。这边呢 ，B 说，我刚提到什么一个礼拜做一场演出，一次到台中。那 A 都只是就是应和这样子。B 说那是因为有跟另外一个女孩子，就是苏瑞，我们俩一块去，然后那个领班一直告诉我们他们一家会怎么照顾我们。好，那这边我们看到那个领班，
这里是什么用法？
这边是也是 Referent-introducing。
你确定？OK。
然后跟前面不同的是，通常我们前面那个它后面接的像小强啊、溪头啊，都是我们已经知道的，就是假定对方知道的东西。那这边有一个比较特别的是，一样是 reference 那个领班，但是它这边是说 a reference position， 指的是说我们并不需要确定知道说领班是哪一位哪个人，你只要稍微有那个概念说有这么一位领班这样子就好了。
这里跟刚刚的溪头不一样在哪里？溪头小强是我们认识的，可是这个领班呢？你其实是到台中做一场演出嘛，对不对？有跟另外一个女孩子，我们俩一块去，所以这个领班其实是第一次出现的，然后也不是我们可以 assume 在我们的 background knowledge 当中的 new 的 given information 或是 identifiable information，right？ 它其实是一个 new information。那我为什么用那个领班？
因为就是只有那一个啊，
因为从两个角度看啊，你记得我们在讲 information status 的时候，我们曾经讲过，有一种 identifiability 是借由 frame evoked 的，还记不记得？所以我如果说我打电话到你公司，然后那个总机，对吗？我昨天送他去医院，然后那个护士，了解吗？我提到医院，他就自然会 evoke 一个什么 schema， 还记不记得？记得哈，这里有点类似，就是我们有一个演出，那演出会有一个表演，会有领班嘛，所以从这个角度来说，它是有某种程度叫做 frame evoked，OK，schema related 的，所以 again， 那我再加上那个，就是更明显的提示你，应该是你可以理解的，这样了解哈，好，
好，谢谢老师。第9个呢，
我们先看完所有的 example， 我们就休息一下，好不好？
好，第9个呢是跟刚才一样，只是我们现在注意的是不同的地方，就是说那种声音很奇怪。
你说这是什么功能？
这个是 Discourse marking。OK。好。这边的话，
什么叫做 discourse marking？ 可不可以解释一下？它叫 discourse marking， 那什么叫 discourse marking？
就是它标示它一个语句。老师，这个我不是很确定。
你有来问我吗？你不确定为什么不来问我？什么叫 discourse marking？跟刚刚的 introducing and referent 有什么不一样？你这个不是跟刚刚那是一样的吗？
是同一个。
对啊。那它为什么叫 discourse marking？
我觉得应该不是。
好了，你要好好想清楚这个问题。亲爱的，我想我们作为一个 presenter， 我们真的要把整个 paper 当作是自己。一定要先理解清楚，你一定要什么视什么为己任啊？要让所有同学能够理解为己任，这样了解啊。所以如果你自己有什么不清楚的地方，就来问我， 那我很 appreciate 前面几篇 paper 同学们，即使有一点点不理解，也都过来跟我 check， 因为他们就是希望自己能够做一个完整的报告。那我还是建议大家，你给 example 的时候，像你这样给 example， 你一定要告诉我这个重点是什么。所以每一张投影片应该是有一个重点，这样了解哈。然后有 example， 有重点，有 example。好，那我知道金央准备的很丰富，所以我们就请他继续完成今天的报告，好不好？
好，回到我们刚才那个第9个例子，这个跟前面那个例子是相同的。然后这里他要特别提示的是说，那种声音很奇怪，反而到这里就讲完了他要表达的东西了。然后他这里又问了一句有没有，因为他就是怕说对方没有跟上，就是不晓得他要讲什么，所以他就在这里问出这句有没有来确定一下这样。
那它跟那种有什么关系？我们在讲那个，它跟那个的关系是什么？
这个是说他讲太多了，他说那种声音很奇怪，就是他那个 speaker 他讲了太多的讯息，包含在里面，然后他想说那个 addressee 他应该会知道，然后可是他后来想一想，他就说他不确定。他觉得他应该是说他认定他懂了，可是他就觉得他不确定，因此他又再回来问他一次。然后第10个这个是 Discourse Marking， 这边的话就像朋友那样子。本来他讲到这里，他就是决定说，我这句话讲完了，你应该懂，就像朋友那样子。那可是 B 这边他又提出了一个疑问，那是哪样子？他其实不晓得，所以。因为 B 他就是要求说，那你要再说明，因此呢 A 的话他就继续讲，就是说是朋友，感觉上是像朋友。那到这边为止，好 B 就懂了，因为你 A 有针对他的回应，然后再去说 B 懂了之后呢，这边事实上跟那个例书啊，它括号起来这是同时间讲的话，所以 B 他已经觉得说，那我懂了，我现在想到另外一个 topic， 所以他就开始另起了一个，他就讲到例书。
那这里为什么叫 discourse marking？
就是他的语句结束了，他表达他的意思，已经讲完了这样。
我们在讲的是那是，还是在讲那样子，还是在讲那
样？
你这里在讲的是哪一个？
那样子。
你这里的那个那是指讲那个那样子的那这个那你说它是一个 discourse marker，discourse marking， 我的问题就是在这里，为什么那是一个 discourse marking？ 所谓 discourse marking 是什么意思？就是再讲清楚。为什么说这个用法叫 discourse marking， 跟前面有什么不一样？
它底下有另外，这个也是，
我的问题很简单嘛，你说它是一个 different function， 可不可以解释清楚？这个 function 到底有什么特别？
这个function它就是当我讲出了这样那样这些词的时候啊，它就是告诉你说我要表达的就是已经到一个段落了，这样完结了。那11的话，我应该要标的是底下的那个这样，听起来很清纯这样。
OK。
对。
听起来很清楚，这样，是结束了。
对，表示结束。
一个 discourse 片段 ，discourse fragment 的 marking 就是这样。OK，discourse fragment。
好，那12是 pause marking 这种用法。这边的话呢，它有这3个都是 pause， 那其中蓝色的这个 simple connective， 它是讲说那的话，通常我们有两种用法， 其中一个呢是 then 的意思，然后怎么样怎么样，另外一个是 and， 还有而且。那这个的话呢，就很像是我们那个平常讲话的发语词啊。我跟你讲说，前面讲了一句话，那如何如何如何，这那就跟 and 比较类似。那另外两个红色的这个跟这个，也都是 pause mark， 就是我在讲说我后面还要再问其他的东西，那我在这边稍微停顿一下。
我们在讲的是蓝色的那还是红色的这个，你要先搞清楚吧。那这不是一个 pause marker 吗？还是它只是一个 connective？ 喜欢你能把这个书念好吗？所以它这里有一个 pause 吗？我看到的反而是那是一个 pause。
上面喜欢你能把这个书念，好像有一点。
这个。
这
个家里的人对你的感觉呢？
有些讲话不是会想说这个，我想
这个怎么样？
对啊，都是这个。
就是给他
对啊，就是停顿的。
那个那呢？
那就是它就是连接它前面的，因为它前面讲说叫唱片歌手，然后接着他要讲另外一个，所以他这边他写的是说那个那 to mark two utterances as being loosely connected。
所以就同样是 demonstrative 来讲，它可以做一个 connective， 也可以做一个 pause marker。pause marking 就是 pause 的地方。我们常常会说，这个好像你要继续思考，在那个时候你不太清楚。我的问题其实很简单，就是这个你现在有两个红色的嘛，上面那个这个家里的人对你的感觉呢，跟下面这个喜欢你能把这个书念好吗？这两个这个是一样的吗？
对啊，都是 pause marker。
好，好。
好，然后第四部分呢 ，the emergence of the category of a definite article。这边的话呢，我们是从它的表格来比较一下，就是它所有的 data 里面的一些资料的对比。那待会我们要看的 Table 1 shows a striking asymmetry. Distal demonstratives are a distinctly more unmarked category.
很好，这边你先把重点讲清楚。等一下我们会看到这个跟那个的分布，那哪一个比较多？哪一个比较多？
那
呀，刚刚的意思就是这样，那比这多很多。OK，
好，所以我们可以看一下左边那个 proximal demonstrative， 那就是这的话，这边它的这里有268个，然后右边 distal 那的话有461个，所以出现的比率上那是比较多的。那其中我们又来看说它的像第3、第4，
很好，来继续。
第3、第4、第5，
到底是看还是说？又来看说，有没有看到我在讲什么？我们又来看说，到底是看还是说？
看。好。
我们要看什么？
这边的话，我们请看 distal 那的话3到3、4、5的 usage， 这边它加起来总共有，应该是说你从对3到5的话加起来总共有 27.5%， 它占蛮多的部分。那这边他说，他就是表达说，为什么特别看3、4、5呢？我们看一下 Unavailable use, identify, Referent-introducing， 它这里就已经不是传统的这跟那的区别，说这是距离比较近的，那是距离比较远的，它已经有就是它额外的衍生出来的含义。那这边因为它占的比重也蛮多的，因此我们就可以逐渐看到说那个或是那些词，尤其是这边它是讲那个，它逐渐的朝语法化的 的路上迈进，就是已经不是单纯指它原本的意思了。
这里我觉得有点很奇怪，你刚刚讲 discourse marking， 我记得很清楚有那样子，不是吗？可是它这边为什么是0呢？你刚刚给我们一个例子，不是 discourse marking 是那样子吗？你们还记得吗？对啊，有一个，至少有一个。那这样子，就这样子，我们可以想象嘛，这样子会比较多啦。OK， 但是你记得你刚刚那个说就那样，然后你说哪样，那样是哪样？那个例子不是也是 discourse marking 吗？所以这里有一点问题哈，这不是你要解决的。亲爱的，我要你们去体会一下这个文章在做什么。我刚刚一直说，他提出来的 evidence 是什么？他用的策略是，我不能够一开始就跟你说这个那或是这是 article， 对不对？那我就把它当做 demonstrative， 我就看我在 discourse 里面它所有的分布，这样懂吗？所以我就看它所有的分布，然后我把这所有的分布归类成这几种类型的功能，这样了解吗？那其中有一些功能跟传统的 demonstrative 是一样的嘛？比方 situation use 本来就是这跟那，对不对？ Endophoric 本来它就有指示代名词的用法。下面的 discourse marking connective 它为什么不敢用6？是因为大部分是这而不是那嘛。Connective use 就是我们刚刚看到那，你知道 pause marker 就是这个 right？ 这些都是我们之前 demonstrative 就已经知道它有的用法。可是重点在这3、4、5这3类，就像我们刚刚讲的，明明已经是一个专有名词，我干嘛还要再加那个西头？这样了解哈？所以黄老师的策略是把这3种用法 define 成不是传统一般的 demonstrative 的用法，这样懂了吗？意思就是你看到 demonstrative 有什么？有新的用法。OK， 好，再来呢？
所以他接下来的表格，他就是把刚才那个3、4、5的用法分别写了出来。例如说，这个 Table 2它是 the identifying use。这边的话，它是讲说，那已经不是用在，已经是不是用在 subject 的位置了。
跟大家讲，不要只看我。
好，所以你可以看它的 numbers， 这是那 distal 它的个数的话 ，subject 只剩下2个，然后你可以稍微看 object 有22个这么多。
So， 重点是什么？这张图要表现的重点是什么？
它就不是它就是它那个指示词传统它的用法，
因为它跟受词合用的比较多，是这样的意思吗？为什么它跟受词合用的比较多，就不是传统的用法？你们给每张图，你要问你自己，你要这张图秀什么嘛，对不对？所以我问的是一个很基本的问题，你要我们看这张图看什么？或是作者本来要用这张图表示什么？
他就是看说他那个已经逐渐远离 subject 的位置了。
OK， 那为什么远离 subject 位置就不是传统的 demonstrative 的用法？你懂我的意思吗？没有错，这张图秀出来的是看到它跟受词，它作为受词的用法比较多嘛。你说的也没错啊，它远离主词的用法 ，A 跟 S 是主词嘛。那为什么远离主词的用法？我就说它比较不是传统的 demonstrative 的用法。跟下面的图有没有关系？你继续看好了。
跟下面的图它也是类似的，它是现在是讲 Unavailable 跟 Referent-introducing uses， 是另外2种 usage， 然后它呈现出来的也是。
OK， 所以也是在 O 比较多，对不对？好，再来呢？
第4张表的话呢，它是说这个 他是说 speaker activated 跟 hearer activated。这边我们可以看到，如果就 speaker activated 来看的话呢，是近的，就是 proximal 占的比例比较大，然后如果是 hearer activated 的话，是远的占的比例比较多。那这个的话，跟我们之前讲的说，就是相对应位置的关系，就会变成这个样子。因为那个相对来讲 distal 是比较远的，所以是 hero 那边会比我们假定 hero 那边会比较熟悉，所以是 hero activated。OK。然后我讲结论的部分。这边的话呢，他总共黄老师提出了2个论点，就是跟前人不一样的。第一个就是说，我们刚才看到了 definite determiner is found to regularly emerge from speaker-hearer negotiation in specific identifiable interactional contexts, where the speaker has reason to believe the identity of a referent to be a community shared knowledge, which he or she can exploit. 这边的话，他讲到说，它的用法浮现呢 ，speaker 跟 hero 他们其实是在做类似协商，他们在沟通，然后他确定说他们讲的内容是彼此都能够互相了解的。然后他第二个提出来的是说，那个就要针对那个来讲。The developing definite determiner function of the distal demonstrative nag is breaking through into the language first in the non-subject position of the sentence. 这边就是跟我们刚才呼应到我们刚才看到的那个表格，那个的话呢，它就开始渐渐的，它已经不是出现在主词的位置。那第二点，他说它就是在变成一个语法化的 definite article。
好，请你回到前面，回答我刚刚的问题。回到那个图表，前到最前面的图表。还记得我们刚刚讲这3个用法，3、4、5是比较非传统的 that 的用法，所以他要讲的重点就是这3个在 discourse 当中出现的那或是那个的用法，是比较接近 definite article 的用法，这样懂吗？所以他接着让你看的是什么？请你看到下面的表格。所以并不是说它出现在 O 的位置，它就是 definite article， 它的逻辑不是这样的。它只是告诉你说，在这个比较新的用法中，我们看到 that 出现比较多的是在什么？受词的位置。OK， 所以记得刚刚不是3、4、5吗？所以3的用法出现比较多，是不是在受词的位置？再来，第4种用法也是出现在 O 的位置比较多。OK， 来，第3种用法，
这边有2种。
OK， 这边已经有2种，所以3、4、5就已经有2种，都是在 O 的位置。意思就是在新兴的用法中 ，OK， 比较接近 definite article 的 that 的用法，它出现的时候比较多是在什么 O 的位置，如此而已。这样了解哈？它就是让你看到这个分布的情况，所以它才能够做后面的结论。回到最后的结论，他说那个 is breaking through， 有没有 into the language first in the 什么 non-subject position， 就是 O 的位置嘛。也就是说，它开始 emergent 成为一个 definite article。那我们目前看到的是，它首先出现的是在 non-subject position， 这样了解了吗？那个 is being grammaticalized into is being 正在这个 process 当中，了解吗？所以它的证据就在这里。我在 discourse 当中发现了非传统 demonstrative 的用法， 而且我看到的这种新兴用法 Emergent 用法，主要大部分是出现在 non-subject position。那我请问最后一个问题，为什么出现在 non-subject position 比较多？
为什么 non-subject 都是比较是 new information， 所以我既然是 new 我要把它限定大于比较大。
new information， 对啦，就是 non-given 啦。我用一个另外的角度讲，它比较是什么？你要引介的东西就是 non-given 的。那在这个 non-given 的 information status 之下，它比较有什么变动的可能？所以你要 introduce， 你怎么 introduce？ 你比较有自由度，因为它已经是一个 given 的东西，很多东西就不用 marking 了嘛。也就是说，因为它是要新引进的东西，你才会在 marking 上面需要怎么样多注意，这样了解了吗？所以它其实是有原因的，的确是跟 information status 有某种关联 ，OK， 或者说 non-topical 啊，因为 non-subject 所代表的应该是 non-topical，OK， 这样了解吗？它比较不是那么已知的，那 topical 有一个解释就是已知 ，OK， 重要的。所谓重要是说我们一直在谈的，这样了解了哈，很好。所以谢谢金央今天的报告。我要提醒下一次报告的同学哈，仍然要从这个角度一直在问自己，我用什么证据去证明它在 Emergent？OK， 今天的 paper 我们到此为止，有没有问题？好，那我们下面休息一下下，我们就请我们的 speaker 过来。Okay, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today. You can see his name there, Josh Hawthorne. Okay, and he's a postdoc at MIT doing a psycholinguistic computational linguistic project, modeling the human mind, how we process verbs. So the project is called the Verb Corner Project, and he just flew from the States to Taiwan to give 2 talks today and tomorrow. We all know there's another talk at Tsinghua University tomorrow, so you are all welcome to come. And also after his talk, you are welcome to ask him any questions. He's very knowledgeable. And his wife is Taiwanese, so he knows a little bit about Chinese. As I said, we will have a light lunch here and we can talk freely after the talk. So we'll just give the floor to Josh. Let's welcome
him. So she just said I'm giving 2 talks. The one tomorrow will be most of my real experimental work on mainly how verbs are learned and on the representation of verbs. Today I'm talking about a specific ongoing project that's new, so it's not done. I actually don't have very much data to show you. It's very closely related to the Mandarin VerbNet project that some people around here are working on, and that's why I'm giving this particular talk, because it seemed relevant to a number of people here. So I want to thank Leo Matron and her students for arranging this visit. I guess this is the first part of the visit to Hsinchu. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. I've been in Taipei for a few days. And so this is, I guess we've already heard, this is work with Martha Palmer and Claire Boniel at University of Colorado. And we're going through thousands of verbs and dozens of semantic features to determine which verbs have which features. I was going to save this bit for later in the talk, but I want to say now, the goal is not for me to stand here and talk for an hour. It's to actually, for you to actually understand what I'm saying. So please do not be shy about asking questions. I have some material that I want to get through, but I don't actually care if I finish all of it. I'd much rather answer questions if you have them. Also, I know this seems to be not typical culture here, but definitely at Harvard and MIT, where I'm from, people interrupt a lot. If you were giving a talk and I was in the audience, I would be asking questions all the time, so please don't be shy.
I did that to my students when they are giving presentations, but not vice versa.
Yes, but really, please ask questions. I gave a talk 2 days ago at Taida, and it seems even though everyone in the audience was sitting there nodding along, about half of them did not understand what I was saying, which I only found out afterwards, and that's too bad. They should have asked then, and I could have explained. So anyway, so we're going through a lot of verbs, so verbs like went and threw and saw, as in John went to the store, Mary threw the ball, and John saw Mary. And we're interested in whether each of these verbs describes, for instance, movement, or a mental state, or the use of force, so actually pushing on something. And for instance, John went to the store does involve movement. Mary threw the ball involves movement. The ball actually moves. John saw Mary does not. Of these, only John saw Mary involves a mental state, so he's actually seeing something. And only Mary threw the ball involves actual force, so she's pushing on the ball to make it go through the air. I hope everybody agrees with my judgments here. If you don't, please say something, because this is going to be important. This is a big project, and I want to give you a sense of the scale. So we're interested in about 8,000 English verbs. There are about 150 semantic features we would like to know about. Now, you might worry that any given verb, it's going to depend not just on the verb, but the other words in the sentence. So we're going to need to test multiple sentences per verb. I will explain to you in a little while why I think it's about 5 per verb. And it's possible people will make mistakes or disagree, and so you want not just one person to answer each question, but several, let's say 5. That's 30 million judgments. So that's a lot. It's so many, it might actually be impossible to do this project. And even if it is possible, it will take years. So a lot of this talk will be about trying to explain to you how we're actually going to make this happen, get 30 million judgments. But first, I should explain to you why we thought it was a good idea to do this project. Why not do something easier? This seems hard.
Just a simple question. So each person will have to make 8,000 times 5 times 150 judgments?
Well, you could do it that way. That would be me and my 4 students who are working on this project. That works out to 6 million judgments per person, which is not going to happen. It'd take too long. So you would want to divide it up across multiple people. And I'm actually going to argue we would like something close to 100,000 people. Obviously, I don't have 100,000 students, so the question is, where are we going to get all these people? And that's part of what I'll be telling you about. That's another reason why we need multiple people per question, because you might think that different people have different biases. And if it's not going to be the same, if you had one person answer every single question, at least the bias is consistent. If you have multiple people, then you have different biases. You want more than one person per question so you can average out the biases. So why not do something easier? Well, so in general in this talk, I'm going to be explaining to you, as I said, why we're doing the project, then tell you how we're actually trying to do the project. And then I do have some early results to show you. As I said, this is a very big project, but we've been collecting data for about half a year now, and we do have some results. So I think there are actually a number of benefits to this project, and I'm going to list them and then describe them. So first, actually, this project will be very important for testing many theories of syntax, also theories of language acquisition. I think it has a lot of important applications in computational linguistics and natural language processing, and it also will give us a window into how the mind works. So there's actually a number of ways. So this is where, since I don't know what you guys already know, please tell me if I'm going too fast through the syntax part or too slow. If you're bored, tell me and I'll just jump. So it turns out that a given verb, of course, as we know, can be used in different syntactic contexts. So for instance, some verbs can be used in noun phrase verb noun phrase structure. John broke the vase, hit the vase, liked the vase. Then there's the noun phrase, verb, noun phrase with noun phrase structure. You can say John broke the vase with the hammer, John hit the vase with the hammer, but you can't say John liked the vase with the hammer. I don't even know what that would mean. Similarly, you can have noun phrase and verb, so the vase broke, but you can't say the vase hit or the vase liked. Now, this is actually a very, very complex system, so I'm just showing you 3 syntactic structures here. But according to probably the most comprehensive recent survey, English has 376 syntactic frames. Most verbs can appear in no more than about 10 of those. So the question is, how do you know which verbs can go in which frames? And for a long time ago, many linguists thought it was just random. This is just part of learning your language. You have to learn for each verb which frames it can go in, which ones it can't go in. But as I point out, this is a hard problem, right? Because there's so many frames and so many verbs.
Just a second.
Yeah.
For John liked the vase with the hammer, this is not good.
Yes.
But you can have another words with. For example, John liked the vase with her heart. How do you deal with those kind of things?
No, you can't say that.
You can't say that.
No.
I'm trying to make a sentence with John like something. Oh, I like Josh likes her wife with all his heart. That's fine, right?
You can
You love your wife with all his heart.
There's an idiom involving love, but I don't think you can use any other. So love and hate you can do. Most other emotion verbs you wouldn't be able to use with all your heart. I think that's an idiom. You can get low attachment. So John liked the vase with the pink design. So where with attaches to vase rather than to like, yeah. No, but I'm just thinking that you can get that, but in terms of the actual tree, it's very hard to get high attachment of with for like, I think, except for those 2 idiomatic expressions. Feared, yeah, no, it's bad.
I guess the question is, how do you deal with can be instrumental, can be manner. I guess that's my point.
Yes. So,
how do you distinguish instrument from manner?
Well, I wouldn't distinguish it syntactically. So you do have, there's sort of 2 classes of sort of linguistic theories out there that sort of live in mirror world. So you have like one theory that has, everything in the syntax, and other theories that put everything in the semantics. So if you actually compare, say, and this may be over other people's head in here, but say Ray Jackendoff's semantic structures or Hale and Kaiser's VP shells, it's probably the exact same theory. But Hale and Kaiser say it's syntax and Jackendoff say it's semantics. So on some syntactic theories, you would have instrumental with and manner with as syntactic frames. I tend to like a very, very surface syntax because it's easy to observe. So I wouldn't distinguish between them, but I'd put that into the semantics. But I think that a lot of what I'm going to say, you can just translate I'm speaking mostly in Jackendoff world. You could translate it into Hale and Kaiser world. I think it would be the same thing. But that if there are places where you think it matters, we can talk about it. So for a long time, it was thought maybe there was no pattern. This is just something you have to learn. But starting in really the 80s, but definitely by the 90s, a lot of linguists came to the conclusion that actually syntax can be predicted by the semantics. So the reason a particular verb can go in a particular syntactic frame is because of what the verb actually means. The best evidence comes from work by Beth Levine. I think a lot of people here will be familiar with this book. I saw it on the table in your laboratory. And so as you probably know, she looked through every verb in every syntactic frame and classified the verbs based on which syntactic frames they can appear in. And then when you look at all the verbs that are in the same syntactic frame, it looks like they have similar meanings. So verbs that can appear in the same frames as hit are verbs like beat, bump, hammer, kick, hit. Verbs that can appear in the same frames as break are verbs like chip, crack, crush, rip. and verbs that appear in the frames that like appears in are verbs like dislike, enjoy, fear, hate, love. And you might notice that there's some semantic similarities within each of these groups. What Levine and others have argued is that it's not just that verbs with similar meanings can go in the same frames, but there's actually a specific set of semantic features that predict which frames a verb can go in. For instance, break, but not the other two classes of verbs, describes a change of state. So if John broke or chipped or cracked or crushed the vase is now different. But if you liked the vase, that doesn't change the vase. If you can hit a vase, doesn't mean that the vase changes. So this has been a very influential theory, but it has some important limitations, empirical limitations. The main one is it just hasn't been tested exhaustively. What I mean is there are many, many verbs like hit, there are many verbs like break, many verbs like, and nobody's actually gone through to make sure all the verbs like break describe a change of state, but none of the verbs like hit or like do. And even more importantly, turns out there's about 300 syntactic classes in English on the latest surveys, and probably at most a dozen of those have ever been studied in any real detail. Most of the classes have never really been studied. And so we don't actually have good evidence about the semantics of those classes. The other issue is the lack of independent evidence. So the theory is basically, if you took all the verbs, looked at their semantics, classified them based on the semantics, you would get the exact same classes that you get by classifying them syntactically. Nobody's done this. We don't know if it's true. And this runs a real risk of confirmation bias. Basically, if you find a syntactic verb class, you look at it, and it's easy to see things that look similar across the verbs. And one of the things we know from psychology is this is a sort of a dangerous way of doing your research because you can convince yourself something is true that's not actually true. You need to actually use independent evidence. And because of these limitations, there actually are still a lot of linguists who just don't believe this theory. Probably the most famous of these that I know is Adele Goldberg, but a lot of construction grammar people in general don't buy this theory. And so Goldberg, for instance, says you can predict maybe a little bit of syntax from your semantics, but mostly you can't. Well, how do we know who is right, Levine or Goldberg? Right now we don't know because we don't actually know the semantic features of very many verbs, so we can't actually test. And right now all you can do is argue and say, well, I think that you can predict the syntax from the semantics. And somebody else says, no, well, I think you can't. We need data to actually find out if this is true in general, and not just for the small number of verbs that people have actually studied in detail. So that's one reason that Verb Corner would be very useful to have. In terms of theories of language acquisition, so in 1989, Steve Pinker wrote this influential book on verb learning, because of course, not just linguists want to figure out which verbs go in which frames. Babies also have to learn that too, right, in order to speak their language. And Pinker, of course, pointed out that if the syntactic frames are predictable from the semantics, your job in learning is now much, much easier than it would be if it's not predictable. And he actually built a fairly elaborate theory based on this that explains, in theory, explains an awful lot of language acquisition, probably better than any other current theory. Still, even now it's been 89, so over 20 years, it's still probably the most complete theory, but it depends on Levine's hypothesis being true, which of course is what we don't know, which is why we would like to test it with, for instance, Verb Corner. Though even if it turns out that the theory is wrong, keep in mind what we're going to have at the end of this. We're going to know a lot about the meanings of a lot of verbs. And we still have to, in terms of language acquisition, explain how kids learn the meaning of verbs. That'll be easier to do if we know what verbs mean. Otherwise, it's very hard to study how kids learn the meaning of verbs where we don't actually know what the meanings are exactly. So I see some nodding. Again, I want to say again, if you are lost or have a question or there's something you don't understand, please ask. Much better. This is going to be a long talk if you're already confused. We have a lot longer to go. It'd be better to make sure that you know what's going on now. So in terms of computational linguistics and natural language processing, some of the issues are the same. Again, you're building a computer program to process language, you need to know which verbs go in which syntactic frames. Again, it would be nice to know what the actual ground truth is in order to build a program that does it right. But there's another reason that a lot of computational linguists have gotten very interested in this, and this is in the, I don't know if anybody's seen the semantic role labeling literature. In general, this has been a popular area of NLP lately, because they have this idea that maybe this will give NLP access into semantics. So most of computational linguistics and natural language processing historically has been about either word recognition, speech to text, or syntactic parsing. We have pretty good syntactic parsers. We have pretty good speech to text, so word recognition. What we don't have are good NLP applications for meaning. But this is complicated. As we all know, meaning is very hard. There's not a single word yet where everybody can agree on exactly what the definition is. And that makes it hard to do good natural language processing of semantics, right? But the theory from Levine and Jackendorf and others, the theory I've been describing, suggests that there's a certain small set of semantic features that are really, really important and that you can sort of get from the syntax of the verb. So we have some idea of how you could find out the semantic features of verbs just from input text, which is great if you want to do natural language processing. But it's now also it's a subset of semantics. It's not as hard as the whole problem of language meaning, but the theory is that these are the semantic features that are particularly important for language. And so if you were able to process that amount of the meaning from the sentences, you would actually have the really important parts already. Again, there's a lot of people have been working on this problem. The problem is, how do you actually test to see if their programs work? To actually test, you want to know what verbs actually mean, so you can test to see if the program has figured it out correctly. But we don't know, so you don't actually know if these programs are working or not. And that's another reason that it would be great to have this Verb Corner project finished, so you could do a better job of testing and developing these sorts of applications. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about, so I'm a psychologist. What I really care about is the mind, not necessarily natural language processing. And this is probably the part that I'm most interested in, which is how this project will give us some information about how the mind works. So here's this sort of a diagram of the mind. So there's the world out there, and you perceive it and you act on it. And this is based on the thoughts you have. And of course, you can talk about both your thoughts and about things in the world. So some researchers have argued that semantics is really just the same thing as thought. But even if it's not the same thing, it's got to be closely related, because we're able to talk about what we're thinking about. What this means is that by understanding semantics, we're actually learning something about the structure of thought itself. In fact, it's probably one of the most direct methods we have for learning about thought. Thought is very hard to observe. You can't just open somebody's head and look inside and see what they're thinking, but you can ask them to talk and see what they talk about. And remember the theory I've been talking about on which syntax is dependent on semantics? You could ask, again, the theory is not all parts of semantics matter. Certain parts like causation and movement and application of force matter, and you might ask, why those parts of meaning? Why not other things? Well, the hypothesis is that it's exactly the parts of the sort of central parts of thought, the way thought is structured, is what determines how language is structured. Because again, you want to talk about your thoughts, so the more similar language is to thought, the easier it's going to be to learn, the easier it's going to be to use. And so by understanding how language is organized, we may be learning something about how thought is organized. And so that's the claim that we're trying to test. Again, even if it turns out not to be true, we'll have learned something important in the meantime that will be useful for future theories. In exactly the same way, language can give us a window into the mind of babies. This has been a very important area of research lately, and it's very, very hard to do. How do you know what a 6-month-old baby is thinking? With an adult, you might just ask them. You can't ask a small child. So there's been... does anybody know anything about cognitive development? Have you heard of core knowledge, intuitive theories? No? Okay, good. So this is I'm actually going to show you an example of an experiment you might run with an infant. So just watch this display. So if you thought that was surprising, then you're just like a baby. So babies expect to see one red stick. This thing where there's two red sticks looks really weird, right? And this tells us, so actually how do we know babies are surprised? Basically you show them that, and if there's one red, like one long stick like this at the end, then they sort of look for a little bit and they look away and are bored. But if they see, this ending, they look much longer, presumably because it's surprising and they're wondering what just happened. And you can measure how long they looked, and by seeing when they're surprised and when they're not, you know what they think about the world, what they expect. And one of the things they expect is that if you see two things moving together, you think they're probably part of the same object. This is one of the classic results that tells us one aspect of infants' minds is that they think there are objects in the world and not just moving colors and flashing lights, but actual objects. So so that's a classic experiment. There's other things that you can test too. Let's see if I can get for example, all right, I got two mugs here. If you had, how are we going to be able to see this? So imagine this is on a table and you see one mug coming along and it goes like this. That's sort of not that surprising because it's hit it. So if you saw this, stops, and then this mug starts going off, that is very weird if you actually saw that in the world and there wasn't a person, I didn't see a person actually doing it. You show that to babies and they also think it's weird. So they think that basically no action at a distance. Objects can only affect each other through actually touching each other. There have been a series of these studies. You might imagine this is very hard work to do. It's very, very slow and it's very hard to design these experiments. Now, children by 1 year of age are already starting to acquire words, and if we can show that the way they do verb syntax is driven by abstract representations like causation, like application of force or movement, that shows that they must be able to think about those things. And that gives us more information about not what a baby thinks when it's born, but at least how babies think about the world when they're 1.5 years old. So that's, of course, this line of reason. This is actually research people do. They try to understand infants' minds in exactly the way that I'm talking about. It's only the right way of doing it, though, of course, if something like the theory I've been talking about is right, which if it actually is true that syntax is driven by meaning, then you can learn about meaning, what children know about the world by studying their syntax. And so that's another thing that we're testing through Verb Corner. So in summary, I think that this project has a lot of uses. When it's done, we're going to be putting the results on the internet, so anybody can use them. And I really do believe, and I hope I've convinced you, that this has the ability to revolutionize a number of aspects of research, much in the way, for instance, Penn Tree Bank has shaped all of language research since it was done. So that's why I think it's worth doing this really hard project. Now the question is, how are we doing this project, and can we actually succeed? And then maybe what are some of the results we have so far? So let me first tell you how we decided which verbs to look at and which semantic features to look at. So I told you about Beth Levine's work. Many of you are familiar with it already. This book, of course, came out over about 20 years ago. More work has been done since then. Probably the most comprehensive version right now is VerbNet. How many people have seen VerbNet, by the way? Just curious. No? Nobody? I would have thought at least a couple people. So you can find this online. This is the website. As part of the Unified Verb Index, the most important part that I'm interested in here is the VerbNet part. They've got a little over 6,000 verbs classified syntactically into a little over 270 classes, plus some subclasses. So since they've already done the hard work of doing the syntactic classification, we're focusing on those verbs. So here's what an actual class looks like. On the website, you have a list of all the verbs in it, and then the various syntactic frames that those verbs can appear in. Let's zoom in on that. So for instance, these verbs can appear in noun phrase, verb, noun phrase, or noun phrase, verb, noun phrase, prepositional phrase. I also want to show you they've actually written down a semantics here. So the tourist admired the paintings involves an emotional state, which is some particular emotion and the person experiencing the emotion, and it happens in reaction to some stimulus. Now, there's also this event variable E. If you've never seen Davidsonian semantics, don't worry about E. It really doesn't mean anything at all. You can sort of ignore it. There's philosophical reasons to be interested in it, but we can ignore it. So these in reaction to emotional state, emotion, these are the semantic features that I'm interested in. Obviously, there was a student once who went through VerbNet and wrote down semantics for every class in every frame. But and this was done based on the research at the time, but as I told you, for most verbs, most verb classes, there really hasn't been very much research. So she had to do it basically just based on intuition and what seemed like a good idea at the time. And as far as I know, she also didn't do it systematically and check that this was true for every verb in a class. So it might be these semantics are right for a lot of the verbs in this class, but maybe not for all of them. That wasn't checked, I don't think. So what we would like to do, what really the focus of the Verb Corner project is basically redoing that exact same project, but on a stronger empirical foundation, making sure that the semantics we write down are correct.
Okay, just a second. Can you explain the difference between the first frame and the third one? Because you add another feature, stimulus there.
Yeah.
So, do you mean the first one is not a stimulus?
So, this is, yeah, I was worried you were going to mention that. So, I don't really like necessarily exactly the way some aspects of VerbNet work. So they've snuck, when you read the paper, they say these are syntactically defined, but you can see they've actually snuck a lot of the semantics in, and they have, noun phrase verb, noun phrase stimulus. I mean, that's clearly semantics that they've put in there. So I actually, VerbNet is all available for download. So I've downloaded it and I stripped out all the semantics from their syntactic frames and remade VerbNet with pure syntactic frames with no semantics in it. So when I say that there are 376 syntactic frames, I mean when you get rid of all these semantic distinctions, they actually have more, but I stripped them out first. And similarly, I'm going through the process of redoing all the classes based on purely syntactic criteria without semantic criteria. So yeah, the difference between here and here is basically semantics, not syntax, far as I can tell.
No, I mean, if their definition of frames is a combination of syntax and semantics, it's okay.
Yes, but it's not mine.
What I mean is, how do you distinguish them? Uniquely distinguish them. So
that's part.
It's like there's an overlap between 1 and 3. It's not complementary distribution. It's a subpart of one.
I mean, and that is, again, I agree. Like if they want to think about frames as being syntactic and semantic at the same time, that's fine. Yeah. But then you run into this problem of how do you define them, because you would need good semantic tests. And that's why I like doing my syntax without semantics, because we have good syntactic tests. I can tell you if this is a noun phrase or a verb phrase. It's very hard for me to tell you if it's a noun phrase or a noun phrase period stimulus.
But if it's purely syntactic, you won't go too far. That's the problem. Like in your friend, in your way of doing it, then I admire him will be the same as I admire his honesty. Apparently, there are two different roles.
So, all right,
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the this gets to I think some deep philosophical issues about how you think about language. So one of the things that especially construction, they're definitely, even though Martha Palmer is in theory an East Coast linguist, she's very influenced by construction grammar. I think they've been thinking about this in a construction grammar way. And on construction grammars, you usually want to say that there's not, say, one transitive frame. There's, 80 transitive frames that, depend on the semantics. That might be right, but it's not clear to me that it's necessary. So if you have rich semantic representations, basically you have rich semantic representations. So you have basically, you know, causing something to happen or causing it to change state. These different sort of semantic constructs that all just involve two participants and are, you know, sort of transitive in a sort of semantic sense. They might all map onto the same syntactic frame. So they map onto the same syntax. Now you can talk about sort of the semantic syntax combination and think of those as being separate, or you can just think of, well, there's all these semantic frames and they all map onto the same syntactic frame. There's only one syntactic frame. What you're doing in normal processing, though, you know which verbs go with which meanings. So you run across a particular transitive, you know which semantic frame it maps back onto because you know the verb. If you're given a novel verb that you've never heard before, so John daxed the ball, you know what dax means. You can do, you know, Bayesian reasoning to guess what the most likely semantic frame is based on which ones are more common. Right, so I like that way of thinking about it because I think it's much simpler. It also, it explains, so there's actually, you can also have a good motivation for why it would be like this. Basically, thought is complicated. You have lots of different sort of ways of representing the world. So again, you have like a caused change of state, a caused change of location. You have, you know, sort of like going places, things like that. And when it's all in your mind, you don't have to worry about certain things you have to worry about as soon as you try to encode it into language and send it out through a production system for someone else to actually perceive on the other end. And I'll actually use vocabulary as a motivating example and then get back to syntax. So a lot of people, actually, Chomsky's the most famous for having said this, have claimed that you can't explain language rationally because there's certain aspects of language that just seem like a bad idea. And one is words are ambiguous. Wouldn't it be better if we had one word for every idea? So instead of, you know, one word glass for, so, you know, glass is actual material and it's also, you know, this is a mug, but you could have a glass of water. You have ambiguity in words. Well, that seems like a bad idea at first, except for if you forget that people have to actually understand what you're saying. And the problem is there's not very many words out there. So if you wanted to have one word for every idea, in order to be able to tell the difference one word from another, they'd all have to be very, very long, right? Because you would just run out of sounds. So the only thing you can do is make the word longer. If you make words really long, now it takes a very long time to say anything. So if all our words were, you know, 10 syllables, it would take a long time to talk. And that wouldn't be great because you might see like a bear coming to eat your friend, and you're in the middle of saying, watch out, there's a bear coming to eat you, but it takes you 3 minutes and they've already been eaten by the bear. So you want to keep your words short if possible. And so the trade-off is, if you want your words to be short, you can't have as many of them, so you're going to have to reuse some words and have the same, you know, word form apply to multiple different meanings. You can apply this to syntactic structures as well. So you could imagine maybe we want one syntactic structure for every semantic structure. But that's hard because now how do you distinguish the different syntactic structures? You know, very often in English we use prepositions. Most of the differences between syntactic structures are just different prepositions. But now we're going to need, you know, hundreds and hundreds of prepositions, and that's not great, right? Because now you have to learn all these prepositions. What you might want to do is have a smaller set of syntactic structures and just have them be ambiguous. So some of them are going to be reused for different kinds of meaning. So this is sort of explaining like why I think about the relationship between syntax and semantics the way I do. Right now, I think it's very hard to come up with evidence demonstrating that, say, my way of thinking about it is better than a typical construction grammar way of thinking about it. But it does make it easier to do certain kinds of research, though. So if you really wanted to take sort of the Verb Corner project seriously as a construction grammar person, it's actually a lot harder to do. And that's one of the reasons I'm not doing it that way. But I think the data that we're collecting, you could still use to inform a construction grammar account anyway. I mean, it's why Again, on construction grammars, the constructions have meaning in them. We still want to know what the meanings of the verbs that go in constructions are in order to develop those accounts. And this is why, again, I think that we have these data, make it available. It'll be useful for everybody. So I wanted you to notice, though, here's the actual case where we have two different different syntactic structures, and they have different semantics written down. This actually is something a lot of people believe is true, not just for the construction. Actually, well, whether you're thinking about it in construction grammar or not. So imagine this is one of the most famous examples. You have the Jodes loaded the hay onto the wagon, or the Jodes loaded the wagon with the hay. So these are two different sentences. They don't mean the same thing, though. So even though it's the same verb. So the Jodes loaded the hay onto the wagon means all of the hay is now on the wagon, right? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding, so people have seen the locative alternation. The Jodes loaded the wagon with the hay means the wagon is now full, but maybe you didn't use all the hay. And so this is why we need a test for a given verb. We can't just ask about what is the meaning of the verb. We have to ask what is the meaning of the verb in a particular syntactic frame. And that is why when I said we're going to need multiple sentences per verb, that's what I meant. It turns out if you define syntactic frames the way I do and then extract this information from VerbNet, you end up with, on average, about 5 sentences, about 5 syntactic frames per verb. And that's why we have that multiplier of 5 in there. And in general, so now you know why I said about 8,000 verbs. There's about 6,500 in VerbNet, but there's some more in the Unified Verb Index that we can include. 5 sentences per verb on average. 150 features, that's just how many features happen to be in the VerbNet semantics. Again, I've told you I don't really believe the VerbNet semantics very much, but it is the most comprehensive survey so far. They needed 150, so that's a reasonable estimate of how many we might need to look at. And then I said we're going to need multiple people per question. So this is obviously way too much work for just me and my students, so we already said this, it turns out, but that's about 5, if we had 6 people, it's 5 million judgments per person. Figure you can do maybe, 100, well, let's say you could do 1,000 in an hour, which you can't. That would still be 5,000 hours, which is a long time. Most of us have other things to do, so we would like to speed this up a little bit. So the problem is we need a lot of manpower. The interesting thing is there are a lot of people out there interested in science, and would like to participate in science if they had a way, but there's just no way, right? Normally science is something you do as a professional, not as a volunteer. And recently scientists have been finding ways of making use of all these potential volunteers out there. These projects usually go under the term citizen science or crowdsourcing. So I'll give you some examples. Actually, has anyone ever heard of citizen science before? Probably has a different Chinese name. No? Okay. Crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is a big, big deal in computer science these days. Good to know about. All right, so, it doesn't show up very well, but these are different pictures of galaxies. Since the Hubble telescope was launched, we now have lots and lots of photographs of oh great, that's much better, of the galaxies in the universe. We have photographs of millions and millions of these. And one of the things scientists would like to know is there are sort of a few different kinds of galaxies. You can see these spiral galaxies here, and these sort of round galaxies there, and there's sort of one other kind, basically. And something scientists would like to know is how many what percentage of the galaxies in the universe are of this spiral kind, for instance. Well, there's millions of them that we have pictures of, and you can't just sit down and go through each one yourself. But there's lots of people out there who like looking at pictures of galaxies. And it's actually very easy to look at this and say, all right, that one's spiral, this one's round, that one's, well, somewhere between round and spiral, that's definitely spiral, this is round. This is easy for people to do. So somebody just made a website, it's called Galaxy Zoo, and all you go there and you see pictures of galaxies and just say spiral, round, other. And they were able to get many, many thousands of people to do this. And even if each one only looks at a few galaxies, suddenly you can get all your galaxies tagged, and they were able to do it in, I think, just like a year or two. And now they have more complicated projects where they're measuring, for these spiral galaxies, just how many arms does the galaxy have, and they have people count that. It has been super successful. Another example is bird migration. So birds, of course, fly from one place to another. And one of the things biologists would like to know is something about that process. How far does the typical bird fly? How does it differ from species to species when you're looking at different kinds of birds? Option number one is go find a bunch of birds and just follow them around for a few years. That obviously is a lot of work, and there are a lot of birds, so you would need a lot of people following all the birds. You can put radio tags on their legs, but the problem is radio tags only transmit for maybe a mile, so you still have to follow the birds around with your truck, so you're listening to the radio signal. But it turns out there are a lot of people who like looking at birds in the world. So these are called bird watchers, and they'll go out and they like to actually keep track of which birds they've seen. So somebody put together a website where you can go, and if you're a bird watcher, you just say, all right, today I saw this number of these kinds of birds. And you actually get to, this is actually useful for you if you're a bird watcher, because now you have a record of all the birds you've seen. But it also means if you have millions of bird watchers all over the world writing down all the birds they saw on different days, you can actually track the populations of birds as they move around the world. Something that was just impossible to do before, but you can do with volunteers. So what we'd like to do is find some way of getting a whole lot of people to do linguistics for us so we can make this project possible. And as I mentioned, if we had 100,000 people participating, each one would only have to do 300 judgments, and we would have all our judgments done. 300 is not that bad. You actually can do that in about an hour. The only trick is we need to find 100,000 people who want to do this. Before explaining how we're convincing people to do it, I want to explain to you exactly what it is we're convincing them to do. Because something that you probably know is linguistics is hard. Something that we actually learn is how to make sophisticated judgments about sentences. If you just ask people on the street, is something grammatical, is it ungrammatical? That's actually hard for most people to do if they don't have training. And we're interested in semantic features, so things like, this is actually the list of semantic features we're looking at so far, things like physical change, location change, mental change, so if you've changed your mind about something, contact, so have you come into contact, touched something, application of force, or you pushing on something, a mental state, basically does this verb involve thinking or knowing or something like that. And evaluation is basically, does this sentence involve something that's good or bad? Now if I just walked out on the street, found somebody walking by and said, I'm going to tell you a sentence, tell me if it involves application of force. They're probably going to just keep on walking very fast. I mean, that's a very hard question to answer. So how do we get volunteers who have no training to answer these questions? Well, I'll show you what I did. This is actually the instructions for our mental state task. So where we're trying to find out, does this verb involve a mental state? So scientists discovered a portal to another universe. In this universe, there is no gravity, so people mostly float in space, but otherwise the universe seemed pretty normal. So a group of explorers went to the new universe in order to set up a colony. After the expedition was sent, scientists realized they had made a terrible mistake. In this new universe, all physical objects, including people, explode on contact. Things you were already touching, like your clothes, are okay, but touch something new and you're a goner, so you will explode. Mission Control is organizing an expedition to rescue any survivors and their expensive equipment. In order to figure out who to look for, you are going through reports from mission robots that have been recording everything that has happened. Unfortunately, nobody thought to program the robot to report whether or not things have exploded. But from the robot's reports, you can tell whether anything came into contact with anything else, in which case it is gone. Don't leave anything behind. If the robot reports Mary greeted Sally, don't assume they're dead. Maybe they just waved. Of course, if you read Mary hugged Sally, then you can cross them off the list. Basically, they have exploded. And so now you have a sentence like, Amber pulled at Alyssa. Has anyone or anything touched or been touched? And you say Amber, Alyssa, or none of the above. Or you would say, sometimes these sentences are hard, so we have these options like you can't tell because in this context the word has more than one meaning. Can't tell because the sentence is ungrammatical. Unfortunately, we're generating all our sentences from VerbNet, and VerbNet has mistakes in it. Sometimes some of the verbs it says can go in a particular frame, can't actually. Can't tell because I don't know the verb. Sometimes the verbs aren't very common, people don't know them, or some other reason. So I ask you, Amber pulled at Alyssa. Has anyone touched anything or been touched? Has Amber touched anything? Yes or no? Raise your hand if you think yes. All right, great. How about Alyssa? Has Alyssa touched or been touched? Raise your hand if you think yes. All right, great. It's obviously not none of the above. Yeah, so they have both exploded. We can cross them off the list and go on. So it turns out people can do this task very well. So we did an initial pilot experiment with about 138 sentences, 8 participants, and one of the participants gave bad responses and was removed, but of the 7 remaining, most of the time they agreed on the answer. So this is looking at the percentage of sentences on which at least this number of people agreed. So almost 60%, over 60% of the time, all 7 people agreed on the same answer. And then you can see the rest of the time, usually 6 or 5 agreed. There's only one case, one sentence, where less than half of the people agreed on an answer. So people generally agreed, which is good. That means that they sort of understand the task. More importantly, they also agreed with what I thought the answer was. So this makes me think that they're doing what it is that I was hoping they were doing. So there's one more thing I should tell you about how the tasks were created. And I just want to, I should be keeping track of time. What time are we going until? Someone remind me? 12:30. 12:30? Okay. Yeah, we got started late, right? So I'm going to have to speed through a little bit of things. Yeah, I'm going to skip this part because it's not that important. So I told you about it. Yeah, just skip this. So we have a bunch of different things that we're testing, all in sort of similar ways. They're sort of these funny stories that highlight a particular semantic feature. So here's the philosophical zombie hunter, which is the one that we use for testing mental state. So philosophers have long debated the existence of philosophical zombies. A philosophical zombie, and this is actually true. If you read philosophy, there is this long discussion of philosophical zombies. A philosophical zombie looks like a person, acts like a person, but there's nothing going on inside. Unlike you or me, a philosophical zombie is never happy or sad, has no beliefs or desires. The zombie acts as if she is happy or sad or believes this and wants that, but it's all just an illusion. You can basically think of them as a very, very good robot, but they're not really, there's no one really there. It turns out philosophical zombies really exist. The government has decided to take an accurate census and figure out who is a real human and who is a zombie. And you have been put in charge. But how do you know if, how do you do this if zombies look and act just like real humans? Luckily, there is an oracle. Everything the oracle says is true. I don't know if people know the word oracle. It comes from Greek mythology. This was a person who you could ask any question and they could tell you the truth. So everything the oracle says is true. Sometimes you can use what the oracle says to prove that somebody is a real human and not a zombie. For instance, if the oracle says Sally is angry or wants to eat ice cream, Sally must not be a zombie because zombies can't be angry or want anything. However, if the oracle says that Sally yelled at someone or ate ice cream, you can't make any decision one way or another because zombies can yell and eat ice cream too. Now skip this sentence. So that's another example. That's looking at mental state. And the reason that we have these these stories is, one, they're sort of interesting. People seem to like them. But two, one of the things we know from psychology is people have difficulty thinking in the abstract. If you can give them a concrete scenario, it's much easier for people to reason about things. And this is actually what we found in sort of designing these studies. When we started, we just had questions like, has anything changed? People thought that was hard. Or, does this involve a mental state? People thought it was hard. But we gave them this, story about philosophical zombies, and suddenly it was a lot easier for people to make these decisions. So, all right, that's great. Now I've told you how we actually are, what the task is we're asking people to do. How do we convince them to do it? Because remember, we need a lot of people. Well, a few things is just making sure people know about it through advertising. I have a blog, which I've had for a while, which is a secret ploy for free advertising. So I write interesting articles most of the time and people read it, and then occasionally I say, hey, I have an experiment, will you please do it? And then people read that and they go do the experiment. There are websites like SciStarter, which is just a website that tells people about citizen science projects. So you're someone who's interested in science, you think maybe you'd like to volunteer, and it has a list, well, maybe you're interested in biology, here are the biology projects. Maybe you're interested in astronomy, here are the astronomy projects. maybe you're interested in language, here are the language projects. Actually, there were no language projects before. I had to write to them and make them create a category for it. Because really this is something that mostly the physical scientists have been doing, and it's not something linguists or psychologists have been really doing very much of. I have an article coming out soon in Scientific American. I don't know if you know the magazine, but it's one of the most popular worldwide magazines of science. In January, there will be an article about Verb Corner, and that'll tell a lot of people about it. And then we have a lot of social media. So actually, if you go to the website, this is the main page of the website, you may notice at the bottom there are all these social media buttons that you can click to tell your friends about the website, and people actually do this, which is great. So they do some of the work for us in advertising. We also used a lot of gamification. Has anyone heard the term gamification? It's kind of new. All right, so the idea is you take something that is not a game and you make it not into a game, but a little bit like a game. And this is something that a lot of shopping websites do this, so you can get points and little badges for recommending things to your friends or buying certain things, or other good examples of gamification. Really, a lot of shopping websites do this, but people have been using it for science projects as well, just to make the project a little bit more fun. So one of the things we have is you have to unlock the tasks. So when you start, here's someone who's just come to the website for the first time. They only have one task they can do, a good world, which is our evaluation task. And they have to start answering questions. And once they've answered a few questions, they unlock a task. I think you need 60 points. You'll unlock your second task, and now you have 2 you can do. Keep on answering more, and you can unlock the next one. People seem to find this motivating, and will answer more questions in order to find the next task. So for instance, here is a user who has unlocked all 7 tasks. So you can see all 7 that we've got so far listed over there. Second, we have you get badges for answering questions, which you may have noticed. So this person here you get badges for answering different numbers of questions. So for this task, they've answered over 500 questions, so they have all the badges up through 500. Opinions differ, but I've heard from people who like this aspect because it sort of makes them feel like they're, making progress, right? And so just answering questions, they sort of know, now I've answered 25. Oh, now I've answered 50. Something else you might see here is a leaderboard. So this person is ranked number 6 overall right now across everyone in terms of the total number of points. Leaderboards are very tricky. So if you had, some websites will have a leaderboard that just shows you who's at the top and then where you are. And actually a lot of people see that and they're like, wow, I'm really far behind, and they quit. So there's research showing that it's actually much more successful if you just show where people, just show that person and the people just above and just behind them. And so now you see, all right, well, I have to answer this many to get to the next person. There's also leaderboards for every task. So this is Explode on Contact, and you can see where this person is. I think they're ranked number 31 out of everybody on Explode on Contact. All right, so I talked about that. Originally, the number of points you got for the leaderboard and the badges was just the number of questions you answered. But recently, we added something else, which is bonus points. So basically, on occasion, you just suddenly are given bonus points. So for instance, in this task, Explode on Contact. Yeah, so there is some person in the backstory. There's this minister of perfection that you're working for, and he's pleased with your work and gives you 6 bonus points. There actually is, and it's important that this happens at random. It turns out there's actually research going back a long, long time that occasionally getting a reward, but it's sort of random, you don't know when it's coming, makes people more motivated to keep on working. So we're using that. And finally, we want to know something about our volunteers. We'd like to know what is their native language. We'd like to know how old they are. For instance, because if we had like an 8-year-old doing it, maybe we shouldn't trust their data because they don't know very much about language yet. And if they're not a native English speaker, maybe we trust their data a little bit less. If they say they're 100 years old, we don't trust them either because they're lying to us. But when we started the project, we had people they come to the website and they just had to log in first and say how old they were and what age they are and what country they live in. And a lot of people didn't like this because they said, well, I don't even know what this project is yet. I haven't seen the questions. I don't know what I'm going to do. I actually had one of the members of my laboratory who was going to work with me on one aspect of this project and sort of analyzing the data. When we launched the website, I sent him the link and said, why don't you check it out? And a couple days later, I asked him, what did you think? And he said, well, I had to answer all these questions first, so I didn't look. I don't know, you tell me about it. And I realized if someone who is collaborating with me won't even fill out the registration, that's not good, right? So there's probably other people who are coming to the website and just not even starting. So what we do now is you can see you can just click Start Now, and you go straight into the tasks. You don't have to register. You answer a couple questions, and then a little window pops up and says, hey, would you like to register? And you can say yes or no. And if you say no, you answer a few more questions, and it pops up and it says, it'd be really helpful for us if you registered because we could, do this or that. And you say no, and then a little while later it says, no, really, it'd be nice if you would register because we really do need this information. And that just keeps on happening until they either get, I think after about 6 times, we just stop asking them because clearly they don't want to. But most people do end up registering. Do I actually have, oh yeah, okay, so I didn't actually make that graph, it looks like. Go back. I didn't make that graph, but it turns out that although there are a number of people who just start and are anonymous, most of the people who answer many questions do register eventually. So about 95% of all our data, all the questions that have been answered, come from people who have registered, so we know what their native language is, how old they are, what country they live in. So this has actually, I think, worked in terms of increasing the number of people who are willing to do the task, but not losing very much information. Finally, this is something that's planned. We haven't done this yet. So we've used this sort of gamification, but it's not really a game. And it would be and we've thought of a lot of ways to make it into more of a game directly, and none of them were a good idea. We've thought about this a lot. You really can't come up with a good game. But what you can do is you can build another game that's related. So what if every time you answer a question and you get points, you can now use those points to buy something in another game. And we probably keep the game related to some sort of word game, like Scrabble. I don't know if you've ever played. And that would now be competitive, so you're trying to beat other people. And this would be motivating. You'd want to answer more questions so you can get more points and beat other people in this other game. We don't want that game to be too interesting because we don't want people to be doing our task only to earn points. And of course, if people don't care about that other game, they don't have to do it. But there's some other people have had success with adding that sort of secondary game in terms of getting more people involved. But that's something that we still haven't done yet because it requires a lot of programming we haven't had time for. So I said I was going to have some preliminary results. We didn't start with all the verbs and all the frames because that's a lot, and we wanted to get started on a smaller subset and make sure things were working. So right now we have, and not all the features. So we've looked at 7 semantic features so far, as I mentioned, just 11 of the verb classes in VerbNet. There's a total of 641 verbs, which is not a lot compared to VerbNet, but it is a lot. I mean, it's more than anyone has ever looked at before with this kind of work. That work comes out to be about 3,200 sentences. And here's actual participation. So this is how many judgments we have in each of our tasks. It's usually around 20,000 so far. Fickle Folk, we've only got 4,000. This is the one on changing your mind, basically. That's because that's a new task I just added a month ago. We have a total of almost 120,000 judgments from 1,500 participants. And that's, again, the first half year, a little less than half a year since we started collecting data. So this shows that we can get people to give a lot of judgments. Obviously, we don't have 30 million yet, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But what have we actually learned from these data? Well, remember that one of the main things that we were interested in is how much Beth Levine's verb classes can be defined semantically, right? So what we'd like to know is within a verb class, syntactic verb class, they all have the same semantic features? So I only have really data for 6 semantic features right now and for 11 verb classes, but we can see how well we've done so far. And I should point out one thing about one of these verb classes, this evaluation one. That one is actually a control question. as far as I know, nobody thinks that whether you think the event is good or bad has anything to do with syntax. And we put that in as a control because we'd like to know if you use a semantic feature that people don't think is related to syntax, do we get as much consistency within verb class on that as the things that people do think are related? This is helpful for deciding, how good these theories are to begin with, and also gives us sort of a baseline, just sort of through random chance, how well do we think we should be doing? So you can ask, this is consistency within class and frame. Remember I told you for a given verb class, for a given frame, verb class has different frames. Sometimes like in the locative alternation, the different frames will mean something slightly different. But if you look at all the verbs in a class in a particular frame, how often do we get the exact same answer? And this is if we were at ceiling 100%, where we always get the same answer for every verb in every frame. And you can see most of the tasks are pretty close to 100%. You're always going to expect some variability, especially since we only have, in some cases, just 2 people who have answered a particular question. And maybe one of them didn't understand the task, so you're going to have a little bit of variation. This is actually very, very good.
What would be an example of evaluation verbs?
So it's not verbs, it's the question. This is
called
the semantic feature is
verbs with this name.
It's called the task is called a good world, and basically your task is to decide just how good the world is. And so you're getting descriptions of things that happened, and you have to decide for each description, is it a good thing, a bad thing, or neither? So John went to the store. Probably neither, I don't know. John won the lottery. Well, that sounds good. So, John died. That sounds bad. That's sort of what you're doing in those tasks. You might ask, of course, winning the... Actually, no, I'll just let you ask if you actually have this question, because I do want to get to the end. So this is across our different tasks, and you can see this difference between evaluation where verbs are much less consistent within class, which is what we expected. Now I can show you for each task, for each class, how consistent are the classes. Now, some of them we have a lot more data for than the others, but to look at evaluation, we can see, a lot of them are not near ceiling. So we have a lot of, if every verb in every frame in every class, we got the same response, these bars would all be over here at 100. You can see most of them are not very close. Compare that with the physical change task, where all the classes are pretty close to 100%, so very consistent. Application of force is also very consistent. Contact, also very consistent. Mental state is a little less consistent, mainly because this class 29, 5, and 61. And I hadn't looked carefully at these verbs when I chose them, and they are weird verbs. Many of them are very low frequency. So I suspect a lot of people just don't know the verbs in those 2 classes very well. I don't know why they were succeeding on the other tasks for these verbs. That's something we're still trying to understand. And location change is also not as good as the first few, but much better than evaluation. So to show you all these together, you can see evaluation, people are much less consistent than on the others. We still want more data for these particular verbs, but we're getting close to where we can start adding more verbs. We have a little bit more we'll be able to tell, is this where things aren't at 100% really noise, or is there a real signal going on there? Another possibility, of course, is always that the verbs are just misclassified, which is sometimes the case in VerbNet. And as a first glance, this makes me think that it's actually very likely, at least for these semantic features, that they are very consistent within verb class, just as has been predicted. You might wonder, I'll actually leave these slides and let you ask if you're interested. But basically, I said we need about 30 million, oh sorry, that should be 30 down there.
You look at 11 classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? Can
Yeah.
you show us what are the 11 classes from that learning?
I gave you the numbers because they don't have good names. Some of them I know. These 2 are emotion verbs, so like fear and frighten. 45 is things like, we'd have to look them up, sorry.
Yeah, we have to look and show them.
Well, they're not numbered in the book. We'd have to look them up on VerbNet. One of them is the HIT class, I remember. 45 are general sort of like cause verbs that didn't have a good name for them. That's why I don't remember, but they're like dry, for instance, is one of those verbs. I think the verbs like want and desire are one of the classes. I don't remember which one.
You chose them because of frequency or any?
I chose, so some of the classes we chose because there were ones where we had strong beliefs about, and the break class is in there. So we had break because one of our targets is change of state and causation, and so we wanted something that for sure had it. We wanted the hit class because that's very close to break but doesn't involve causation, so we could compare. We did the emotion verbs because I've done lots of research on emotion verbs and know something about how those should come out. The want class was in there because it's another mental state verb, but not emotions. And I've wanted to know about other mental states that don't involve emotion. And then the other classes were no particular reason, just other stuff. I mean, we had to start somewhere, so we picked a few others. Mainly ones that didn't have too many syntactic frames, because if the class has too many syntactic frames, it becomes hard to make the sentences. It's just more work to get started, and we wanted to get the project going as quickly as possible. You might ask, so are we actually going to get our 30 million judgments? We've got 120,000 yet so far. I think that we are going to be able to get a whole lot more than we have. I can tell you why if you're interested, but I'm going to skip this and just tell you if I actually get asked. And instead, I'm going to conclude here and say thanks to my collaborators and research assistants who have worked on this project. Thank you all for having me here. And please ask me any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very interesting project, and most of our students are doing verbs. So, yeah, we'll have more discussion after lunch. Let's thank the two photographers. Thank you. That's it. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't actually say much about this because I hoped it was obvious for those of you who are not just working on verbs, but working on Mandarin VerbNet, how this is related to questions that you're interested in. Which is, of course, why I'm here talking about this project.